Hello everybody. So today I wanted to talk about Bharat, which is the name of India, one of the names of India. And this is a new information for me, and I found it to fit in really well with what I already knew. So I'll just put that into perspective first of all. So India translates to land of the Hindus and is a bit of a nonsensical name. So you kind of might know that Australia translates to land of the south, or Southland. Norway's Northland, and you got names like Spain, or at least Hispania, means land of the setting sun, or basically west, or the opposite of Japan, which means land of the rising sun, or east. The old name for China, the Zhongzhou, meant central land. And we have a lot of these quite plain names for countries that also give a bit of an insight. Albion, the old name for England, meant white land, named after the white cliffs of Dover, which is white stone. And of course I think that was for the whole of United Kingdom. It always gets a bit confusing there. So what is the name of India that's a bit more interesting than that? Because just calling it land of the Hindus doesn't make a lot of sense. And now for Hindus, they'll tell you, and they've told me, that Hinduism has always been, that it was the first religion and it used to be all over the world, but then most of the rest of the world abandoned it, but people in India kept the faith. Now that's their belief of how it happened, and therefore in their minds India means the only place left that still follows Hinduism. I mean, they still follow it a little bit in nearby areas like Nepal and all that, but it's really just India. And then of course you say, well, what was an old name for it before there was Hinduism? So what are you talking about? There's never been a time before Hinduism. And they'll say, well, it was called Hindustan. Never been called anything else. So I went through all the old names, and I did find one that was a little bit different too, so it didn't have to do with Hinduism. And now I can't remember the exact way it went. It was something like Siviputhan or something, and essentially it meant Berry Island. Now why was it called Berry Island? They wouldn't tell me. There was no information as to why it was called Berry Island, but clearly that had nothing to do with Hinduism. And an actual check of names of other places said that actually at one point the name of the continent of Africa was Berry Land, and that there was a time when India was considered to be an island of Africa. Now, of course, it never actually was, but there was a time when it floated nearby, and in fact it connected to Mauritius, which is a microcontinent that at the moment is just Madagascar and Mauritius, and the rest of it's underwater. But sea levels rise and fall over thousands of years, so every time we have a cataclysm it either rises or falls, or probably both, depending on where in the world you are. So we don't know if there was a land bridge from Africa straight to India, because we know that India connected there at one point, and when they disconnected it created massive seismic disruptions and sunk, we believe it sunk that land. We don't know exactly what happened. And similarly, when it landed in South Asia, it created massive mountains. And so we know that that was quite a big deal. So it's possible that it was named that island either when it was connected or soon afterwards when it was floating, certainly before it landed in South Asia, but when it was clearly not an island anymore. But also we know that India it's called the subcontinent, and it's called that because it's not a part of Asia, it's actually a part of Australia. And there was a time, and I'm not talking about Gondwana land when everything was all touching, but I mean there was a time when it was a part of Australia. I just sat there, and at one point, and we're not completely sure when, but we're talking about millions of years ago, possibly billions even, no, probably not billions, but certainly over 1 million years ago, it snapped off Australia for some reason. We don't know why, but it snapped off, and it created the Great Australian Bight in South Australia. And that matches exactly to India. So we know that happened, and then we know that it floated over to touch Africa, or at least to touch the microcontinent of Mauritius, and then it floated off to where it is now. And it may have actually gone to some other places as well. It's very hard to pinpoint what happened with it, but it's still moving, and there is a point there will be a time when it will break free of South Asia and will go somewhere else. We don't know where it'll go. Maybe it'll go to Europe this time, maybe it'll go to Americas, maybe north or south, who knows. Maybe it'll come back to Australia. It's very hard to predict, but it is still moving. India is still moving to this day. So I know there's a few people that think it's always been a part of Asia. That's just not true. In fact, if you're in India, you're not actually in Asia. And I'm talking not just about India, but the whole subcontinent. So if you're in Bangladesh, you're in Pakistan, you're not in, or even Sri Lanka, you're not in Asia. You're not Asian. You're your own subcontinent. In fact, if you want to talk about continents, you're actually Australian as far as the continent is concerned. You're not a part of the country of Australia, but you're part of the continent. But that's certainly a part of that. Now, going back to this name Bharat, how does that fit in? Now, Bharat means land of the Aryas, as in the Aryan race. Now, you may know the Aryan races. That was the name used by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in Nazi Germany, World War II and just before. And so we're talking late 1920s, 1930s and 1940s. And that was essentially referring to what we'd always called the Caucasians, or white people. Now, Caucasian, of course, refers to Caucasus Mountains, which are in Georgia, which is essentially very close to Russia, and that's sort of the border of Europe and Asia. Now, what does that have to do with India? It's quite a long way from India, but that's not that far, but still. But the thing is that racially, Indians, or known as Dravidians in some places, are actually, they're Caucasian. They're just darker skinned Caucasians. So they're still racially Caucasian if you think of that three race theory. And again, as I said in another video, races are really a bit of an imagination. That they're not really real, but in terms of looks they are. In terms of body chemistry, we're all the same race. But there was a time when there were different human races alive at the same time. I've talked about this before. We had Neanderthals and we had Denisovans, and they existed at the same time as Homo sapiens. It might be easier to think of Homo sapiens as Shinar, Neanderthals as Adamu, and Denisovans as giants, which is essentially what we've called them. They're in the Bible, they're in a lot of other religious texts. So we don't know a lot about this war, but what we do know, according to the Sumerians, is that the Adamu, or Neanderthals, were created to be slaves of the Anunnaki, who were the gods on earth, or angels, or giant people. Now, they're giants as in 20 metres tall, which is much bigger than the Denisovans, who are about between 2.5 and about 5 metres tall. Still much taller than us humans, but there's giants and then there's giants. So the Adamu weren't particularly tall. They had red hair, and they were of course freed by the Igigi, who were of course the dragons on earth, which is another type of angels, but they were more beast-like. So they freed them and then they went away. Now, where did they go to? We don't know. So what if, and this happened about 400,000 years ago, we know this from the age of the Neanderthals, around about 400,000 years old. How did they get from there up to Germany? And yet we'd always assume they were in Germany because Neanderthal Valley is Germany. But what if they, instead of going north to Europe, and Germany had had people on it for 3 or 4 million years, so why didn't humans notice the Neanderthals? So what if the reason they didn't notice them is because they actually went south? And there were people south as well, but maybe they went south, went across to Mauritius from perhaps South Africa, and then from Mauritius skipped over to India, and then India was floating away, and so they were left alone. Now that would explain how a different race of humans evolved. I mean, scientifically, because maybe they were a group of people who were enslaved and then free from their slavery, perhaps not from dragons, but just some normal people. And they went off, and after however many hundreds of thousands of years on the island, it became Neanderthals. And then perhaps after they landed in South Asia, they went and attacked Europe. They wouldn't have attacked Asia because they're right next to China, and China was very powerful even then. They would have gone, nah, we're leaving that one alone. Let's go over to Europe where there's less people. And they conquered them, and perhaps that's why that became the land of the Aryas, or Bharat. And perhaps the Aryas was referring to not white-skinned people, but Neanderthals. And then, of course, that may have led to a war. Now, I'm trying to imagine how the Denisovans ended up in Russia, or at least in Siberia. And they've only found them in that area. Now, there have been Homo sapiens with them, and they've bred with Homo sapiens. They've also bred with Neanderthals. But how did they get there? And how did we have a new species of humans over there? Now, one hint is that we know that China was about as east as anyone went for a very long time. We went a little bit further east to Japan about 2 million years ago, but we didn't go to Russia. There was no one there, but maybe we did. Maybe some people from China went to explore the land further east, ended up in Russia, which isn't very far from China, and maybe they got stuck there, got lost and separated, and then evolved over thousands of years to become this gigantic human species. Maybe they grew because they had to grow, because they were fighting very big animals and very powerful animals. And maybe that's how they were formed. I mean, of course, according to the Sumerians, they were half gods, or half Anunnaki at least. And you've got the likes of Gilgamesh. And of course, according to the Christians, they were fallen angels. And so we have different explanations, but perhaps that's the real explanation. The scientific one is just that they separated and then grew larger in isolation. Now, the Denisovans we know were wiped out around perhaps 30,000 years ago, but perhaps they were wiped out after they allied with the Homo sapiens, perhaps with the Chinese, to help to fight the Neanderthals, and then the Neanderthals wiped them out. But then the battle was so powerful that it allowed the Homo sapiens to win, because we know from that war, according to many religious texts, the humans got help from the gods, and maybe that help was actually the Denisovans, and that's how they won, because the Neanderthals were far more superior, intellectually superior. So perhaps that's what happened. And so perhaps that's the role that India played, and that India did have superior technology, at least from the Neanderthals. And because we know they were smarter, and perhaps all that time floating along as an island, they developed some really good ideas about things. Maybe there weren't that many predators around. They were able to grow very smart and develop quite well and share that knowledge with the world. But then, of course, the Homo sapiens didn't want that, so they attacked and killed them. Now, that's all a bit of a theory. Well, not all of it's a theory, some of it's a bit of a fact, but it is a bit of a better explanation for what might have happened in that war, and why the Denisovans ended up allying with Homo sapiens instead of it being a three-way war. Because if it was a three-way war, you would think that the Homo sapiens would have lost. Who would have won out of strong versus smart, we don't know, but certainly Homo sapiens were neither strong nor smart, so why'd they win? But perhaps they won from that tactical point of view. Maybe even China didn't fight. I've got that sort of theory there, that China stayed out of it, that they were neutral, but that the Denisovans fought. Anyway, that's a bit of a theory about Bharat, and that's all just because I found out another name for India. Perhaps that's where Neanderthals first came from. Interesting thought, but we'll see how we go. Anyway, that's it from me. Bye bye.